Hi, everybody. It's another day of headlines in context with Ron. I'm Ron, obviously. And what we do here is we look at the news headlines that are being served up on some of these aggregator sites, and we try to look at what's maybe behind them, some of the historical context, maybe have some commentary to see if we could put things in perspective. Because there's a lot of people out there that they're trying to get you to lay down your life for their cause, to march in their parade, and maybe you just want to understand what's really going on rather than just the facts. We need to go beyond just a statement that something happened and to understand why it happened. So let's get right to it here. We've got King Charles has some health problems here. That's too bad. Here we got weather. Especially in the U.S. news media, weather is a very popular thing. People are glued to their channels. We have the Weather Channel in the United States that people just put on as sort of almost like ambient noise, but doesn't really interest me. Doesn't seem to be any intelligence behind it. It's just patterns that are happening over and over, and we always have to be frantic when it does happen, because in our little lives, in the stretch of time, our lives are like the life of a housefly, who live, 16 days or something in terms of all of history. So every time these big things happen, it seems like it's the biggest thing in the world, but it'll happen again, and it's happened in the past. So I'm not much interested in the weather. Another thing I'm not much interested in, I think a lot of people, judging by a lot of comments online, is the Grammy Awards. A lot of politicking. This is a fascinating thing. I just wanted to mention this because the Tracy Chapman's first album, I think it was called Tracy Chapman. Every song on it just about is fantastic. You could sit down and listen to it. One of the really transcendent things, I believe. I know because it was so popular, a lot of hipsters want to say that this was packaged for the masses, but it was something special, and those songs of hers continue to be something special. And see, at the time, songs like A Fast Car and Talking About a Revolution, it was a kind of left-wing voice wailing in the wind, because that record came out in the 1980s, which was a time of capitalism and yuppies and greed is good, and it seemed like the whole era of anti-war hippie philosophy had been trampled, was dead. And hers was a lone voice that shone out, that said that there was a underclass that had aspirations that were not being met in this new age. And that was, so it was a sort of a protest song. And I just remember talking about a revolution and feeling like the sentiments there, that the poor people were going to rise up and take their share and take away stuff. It seemed almost humorous at the time when excess and big business were being glorified, and it made you feel kind of sorry for people who staked their claim on such sentiments. So it was a protest. So the reason I wanted to talk about this is, in recent times, this other guy, some country guy, what's his name? Chapman. No, Luke Combs. Luke, not Chapman's Tracy Chapman. Luke Combs, country artist. Now, if you remember, when his version of the song came out, a lot of critics ridiculed it because Fast Car is a sort of a protest song about the way people have to live. And it was indicative, like I say, of that lone voice that shone out in the 1980s to speak out against the the capitalism and the excess that had taken hold of the culture then. Well, nowadays we have a Democratic president who is trying to stay in office against Trump, who is claimed to be very evil and a dictator and the worst thing possible. So you could see why critics were not happy to review Fast Car. Now is a good song when critics would have been in the 1980s, because now it doesn't fit with the narrative. The narrative now the media's been saying is everything's fine. If you think there's too much inflation or too much immigration or too much homelessness, you're mistaken. It's better that things are better than they ever have been. That's because a lot of the media supports the Democrats or doesn't support Trump. So this time around, the fact that Fast Car, Luke Combs' cover of Fast Car, became super popular was seen as a threat, because that song is a protest song. And it might indicate to people that things are not perfect, that maybe people want to change. So that's the context of the critics' reaction to the cover of Fast Car. And, all this points up the idea that very often when you're a critic, it doesn't say so much about the thing you're criticizing. It says more about your own time that you are in, your own little prejudices of the age. Like all these people who look at some media that was produced before 2016 and they're reviewing it now and they say, well, it didn't age well. Well, that just means in the last few years, people have radically changed what they consider to be correct or politically correct or not. So we have to be careful as critics that we're not too much stuck into the mainstream of thought, because then our criticism will tell the audience something about ourselves rather than what we're critiquing. Okay. Enough about pop music. I said I wasn't interested in it, and then I said all that stuff. Super Bowl coming up on the 11th. I'm not a sports guy, but I like the NFL. I like sort of like chess with human people, the strategy, the technical aspect of it. I love that. Secessionist movement wants to avoid civil war. You would think that would be the cause of civil war. A lot of these extreme feelings right now are very temporal feelings because we have Biden and Trump and the election coming up. How that ends up, who knows how it will go. And all these guys, they're old anyway. So, and the president's only 4 years or 8 years at most. Remember how panicked people were about George W. Bush and then about Obama, and now that they're forgotten. So hopefully these difficult times will pass by quickly. What else do we have here? I don't know. I wasn't sure whether to bring this up, but you have these kind of political rock stars that get into power. Some people would say that actually the vice president today, Kamala Harris, is the same way. People who are moved out of their depth, perhaps Kamala Harris, because they said we have to choose a woman for this post. They pledged that for the vice presidency. Maybe for some of these Republicans, there were a lot of Trump true believers. There were a lot of kind of peculiar characters that catapulted themselves into these high positions. And what we see is they don't maybe have they can't work with others well. They don't play with that well with others. So here's news of that with this congressperson. What else do we have? We have a big immigration bill. Obviously, Biden's trying to get his house in order before the election because it is shown that that kind of free and open immigration, even if they catch someone, they release them immediately. I'm not sure how many countries in the world do things like that. That has become an issue for good or ill with the voter, and Biden has vowed to close the border and tighten things up. Republicans would rather not even though that's their issue, the Republicans would rather not have that happen because they don't want Biden to take that issue off the table for the elections. It's fascinating here. The guy who invented the concept, what are those, the keys? I forget what they're called, that enabled Bitcoin. I remember when it was first announced, talked about on slashdot.org a long time ago, and all this coin stuff, virtual currency was thought, oh, it's the end of the nation state, because all of these countries, the United States in particular, they print the money, they control the money, they can have 34 trillion in debt that's just imaginary money that they print up, and people, it's still valued. That kind of craziness can be put at an end with these bitcoins. You know, we know how countries will manipulate their currency for various reasons to help their economy before elections, and to have a currency that's outside of that would be very dangerous to nation states. And in a way, all that's completely true, all true. But in reality, what's happened with all this coin stuff, it's become the realm of scammers and scams, and used for illegal stuff. I guess that's, scammers ruin everything. And then they have NFTs, which I've talked about those before, but a lot of these high hopes, when the technology starts out, they just fall into the realm of scams. Celine Dion. Okay. More stuff like this. I don't want to read that headline. Wouldn't have been too long ago when a mainstream news media would not have put words like that in their headlines, but here we are. And, it isn't a coincidence that this sort of anti-Trump thing is happening. Oh, it's just happening. It happens to happen in an election year. So I'm sure we'll see many more things like that occurring. Some dumb actor beat somebody up. I wish I was big enough that I felt I could beat people up, but I'd probably try that and be the one beaten up, but this is the new axis of powers here. We see China and Russia discuss outer space security and AI weapons. These are the powers, along with North Korea, along with Iran, who've created a new axis of power that really wants to make sure the U.S. is overextended and not interested in engaging in policing the world as they have for so long before. We have a dictator in El Salvador. Of course, in the West, we see this, but, it's a syndrome in many countries when you have countries that are in utter chaos. When gangs rule, people will always kind of tend to fascist dictatorships to restore order. And we see this again and again in smaller countries that face chaos, despite the disapproval of the West, who would like nice little elections all the time. What else do we have here? Apple Vision. Cops pull over user for driving under virtual. It seems silly. I I had one of these things for the Samsung, like a virtual reality headset. It wasn't quite the glasses, but you put it on once and then it's kind of cool, but you don't want to put it on again. I don't know. And these are expensive too. They're over $3,000, I think. Tesla board members felt pressured to take drugs with Musk. um, oh, here we have North Korea. This is this the year they will fire nukes? It's a good article with all kinds of other stuff. Pardon me. And this is part of the idea that we're coming up to an election year. Even if Biden is reelected, U.S. public and the Congress is not that interested in spending hundreds of billions of dollars on all the foreign wars and all the foreign policing when there are problems at home, inflation, high debt. It's an interesting change of public feeling, because for so many decades Americans have been satisfied with invading countries and being the policemen of the world. I think what we saw in the 21st century, and I've said this many times, you had the media who really wanted to get rid of George W. Bush. And Bush made a couple, in hindsight, we would say, ill-advised invasions into Afghanistan and Iraq that his administration didn't do a very good job justifying or explaining to people. And so the media went on about how he's a war criminal and he's going to be pulled before the Hague, et cetera, et cetera. You're killing innocent women and children. So then we get into other presidents in the other parties, such as Obama and the Democrats, or now Biden. They seem to either starting or participating in foreign wars. That same public who has been conditioned by the media to say these wars are bad also believe they're bad even when a Democratic president is in office, even if the media wasn't screaming that that Barack Obama is a war criminal because he invaded Libya and caused a quagmire there. So what we're seeing is a change of perception, of public belief in the United States, and probably in other Western democracies as well. And any country that wants to make a move, we said North Korea always does a lot of saber rattling in election years. Trump has pledged not to be engaging in these foreign wars. Exactly what the media wanted when there's a Republican president in power, but Trump may actually do it, and so it's causing a lot of countries. China has ambitions in the South China Sea and Taiwan, and Russia's trying to fight its war in Ukraine, and was initially shocked at the blowback against their aggressive action by the West. And we have the situation in Israel, which normally the West was very closely behind Israel, and anybody who said anything different would have been considered, anti-Semitic. But this time, perhaps in the conduct of this incursion into Gaza, Israel has been pulling defeat from the jaws of victory, at least in public perception around the world. Here we have Iran could build a nuclear bomb in a week. It's another country that is that's saber rattling. It has the ability and it has the mentality to want to be a major player in that region and get the U.S. out of the Persian Gulf. And what else do we have here? More stuff about electric vehicles aren't working. My prediction would be, this is really all about the United States. Huge auto market. But we also have lots of other smaller countries that depend completely on oil and gas that's imported. So for these countries, it's EVs are useful and necessary for their national policies because there's a lot of countries that import all their oil. The U.S. is the number one oil producer in the world now, and also in these a lot of countries, it doesn't get as cold as it does in the U.S. So we don't have the problem with the batteries that we heard recently that caused consumers in the U.S. to want to turn away from the EVs. So my prediction would be U.S. market, has a knee-jerk reaction, goes back to gas-based cars. And in the meantime, China is stealing the march on the United States in EV production. And if you go outside the United States in a lot of little countries, you might see a lot of strange electric cars with strange names that you've never heard of before. And that is the proliferation of Chinese companies that are just pumping out these cars cheaply. They don't even require all of the underwriting and the funding that the U.S. government, gives a tax break to and discounts to people who buy cars in the EVs in the United States to underwrite that. It's very expensive. Just goes back in those big corporations, but China's doing it in many countries without those kind of incentives. So that's what's happening with EVs. Sitting all day at work boosts risk of early death by 16%. Another something to worry about. An STD epidemic. So I think that's all the news. We didn't have a huge thing today. We've got wars going on in Ukraine, and we've got wars going on in the Middle East. We've got Iran trying to provoke the United States. We've got the election coming up this year. So it's going to be a lot of exciting and interesting geopolitical things to talk about. So stay tuned for that. And let me tell you about my book. Young people find their dreams and failures in Bangkok, and then go on to the furthest places in search of something the modern world can no longer give. This is the story of There Are Still Unknown Places, my new novel on sale at Asia Books and on Kindle ebook. It's a tale for a new generation, disillusioned by the promises of the world, wanting to search for their destinies in far-off places. That's my latest novel. Some of the themes in it mirror some of the things we talk about on this channel about people trying to disassociate themselves from mainstream culture, go to the furthest points of the earth, all the while seeing the world that they knew, that they grew up in, change in strange and frightening ways. Before we go on this channel, we look at, this is our Art of War playing cards, where we try to get some wisdom from this Chinese guy who lived 1,000 years ago, more than that. I think it's 14. So today's card says, render the engagement pointless. Now the idea is with the Art of War, if you've seen all these books, you're supposed to try to relate these axioms that were used in warfare and kingship to your personal and private life. So the strategy for render the engagement pointless is neutralize the objective that puts you at odds with your adversary. The basis is without an objective, your adversary has to reason to act against you. So, that's interesting. I don't know. Sometimes I can think up right away how I can relate this to personal life, but just like the one that said loot a burning house, I don't immediately see the where this leads to. But yeah, if you're in conflict with somebody, maybe you're probably in conflict over the same thing. If there's a way you can neutralize, remove the objective, take that off the table, that may mean conflict is avoidable. And usually in business and personal life, you only have a certain amount of mental energy and actual power, social power to engage in battle. So you don't want to be battling with everybody, and you don't want to battle if you don't have to. If you can win without battling, that's the best thing. So hey, see, I did relate it to personal life. So anyway, tune in tomorrow and tune in this year for lots of videos on where we look at the headlines, maybe understand what's behind them rather than just the facts that are being related. So see you tomorrow.